The German intelligence services had tracked Allied industrial capacity since before the war, compiling reports on factory locations, production capabilities, and resource availability. But they had consistently catastrophically underestimated what America could achieve when fully mobilized. This was not mere incompetence. The assumptions built into German strategic thinking, shaped by Nazi racial ideology and Germany's own industrial experience, made American industrial power seem impossible, even fantastical. Germany's own wartime experience colored everything they believed about industrial production. By 1943, the Reich had mobilized every available resource, stripped occupied territories of raw materials and machinery, implemented slave labor on a massive scale, and pushed its industrial capacity to what seemed like absolute limits. German factories operated around the clock. Workers put in extended shifts. Production of weapons and ammunition had increased dramatically from pre-war levels. Germany was producing tanks, aircraft, and artillery at rates that would have seemed unthinkable in 1939. Yet, despite this total mobilization, despite conquering most of Europe and exploiting its resources, despite the desperate intensification of production under Albert Speer's direction, Germany was losing the material war. The fundamental German miscalculation began before the first shot was fired. In May 1940, President Franklin Roosevelt stood before Congress and announced that America would produce 50,000 aircraft annually as part of a massive rearmament program. Over the following months, he expanded this vision. 185,000 aircraft, 120,000 tanks, 55,000 anti-aircraft guns, and 18 million tons of merchant shipping within 2 years. These figures were transmitted to Berlin through multiple intelligence channels. When presented to Hitler and his advisors, the German leadership's response was dismissive, even contemptuous. The numbers were obviously American propaganda, they concluded, designed to intimidate Germany and boost Allied morale. The assessment seemed entirely reasonable based on available data. In 1939, American military aircraft production totaled fewer than 3,000 planes annually. The US Army ranked 18th in the world in size, smaller than Portugal's. American tanks were obsolete designs, few in number. The US Navy, while substantial, was divided between two oceans and focused on coastal defense rather than power projection. How could a nation with such limited military capacity suddenly increase production 6-fold in just 2 years? It violated every principle of industrial mobilization that German experience had established. Building factories took years. Training workers required months. Developing production techniques demanded extensive trial and error. Roosevelt's proclamation seemed like the fantasy of a desperate politician rather than achievable reality. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe and one of Hitler's closest advisors, reportedly laughed when he heard Roosevelt's announcement. While this account comes from secondary sources rather than contemporary German documents, multiple historians cite Göring stating that Americans could only make refrigerators and razor blades and could never produce the military equipment necessary to defeat Germany. Whether the exact quote is accurate, the sentiment it captured was certainly real. German leadership genuinely believed American industrial capacity was unsuited for military production. This assessment seems supported by observable facts. America excelled at producing consumer goods, automobiles, household appliances. But military equipment required different expertise, different organizational structures, different engineering approaches. German industry had been preparing for war since 1933. How could American consumer goods manufacturers possibly match German military industrial capacity? The Germans failed to understand something fundamental about American industrial potential that would prove decisive. The Great Depression had idled massive amounts of industrial infrastructure across the United States. Factories sat empty or underutilized. Millions of skilled workers remained unemployed or underemployed. Machine tools that could produce components for automobiles, tractors, or refrigerators sat idle or operated at reduced capacity. What looked like economic weakness was actually enormous reserve capacity waiting to be activated. When Roosevelt called for military mobilization, he was not asking American industry to build entirely new capability from nothing. He was asking them to convert existing factories, rehire laid-off workers, and redirect machinery that was already built, installed, and proven. The infrastructure for industrial mobilization already existed, requiring only redirection rather than creation. Germany, by contrast, had no such reserve. By 1940, German industry was already operating at near capacity. The Nazi regime had been rearming since 1933, steadily expanding military production year after year. There was little idle capacity to activate, few unemployed skilled workers to rehire, minimal machinery sitting unused. German expansion could only come through building new factories from scratch, conquering territories with existing industrial capacity, or exploiting slave labor. Each of these approaches took years to implement and faced inherent limitations. The fundamental difference in starting positions. American unused capacity versus German full utilization meant that America could scale up production far faster than Germany could match, and on a far larger base. The German intelligence services, particularly foreign armies west under Colonel von Röhner, had the institutional responsibility for tracking Allied capabilities. Von Röhner came from aristocratic Prussian military lineage. His family had served Germany for generations. He embodied the professional Prussian officer class, methodical, detail-oriented, committed to objective analysis. His organization collected information from multiple sources, including Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights, signals, intelligence from radio intercepts, agent networks operating in neutral countries, systematic interrogation of captured prisoners, and documents captured during military operations. Throughout 1941 and 1942, as America entered the war and began mobilizing, the intelligence picture reaching Berlin remained incomplete and confusing. Reports of American production capacity varied wildly depending on source and method. Some indicated massive increases in output, factories running multiple shifts, tens of thousands of aircraft rolling off assembly lines. Other reports suggested continued economic struggles, labor disputes, inefficient production methods, equipment of inferior quality. The German High Command chose to believe the more comforting assessments, the ones that aligned with their preconceptions about American weakness. This selective acceptance of intelligence was not unique to the Germans. All military organizations tend to favor information confirming existing beliefs over data challenging core assumptions. But in Germany's case, the cost of this cognitive bias would prove catastrophic. After all, Germany was winning in 1941 and early 1942. The Wehrmacht had conquered Poland in weeks, France in 6 weeks, Yugoslavia in 11 days. German forces occupied Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, most of France, significant portions of the Soviet Union. The Luftwaffe had proven itself the most formidable air force in the world. German tanks and tactical methods were clearly superior to those of any opponent. German U-boat was sinking Allied shipping faster than it could be replaced, or so Berlin believed. Why should German leadership fear a nation that had not fought a major war since 1918, whose army was tiny, whose tanks were obsolete, whose industrial capacity was oriented toward consumer goods rather than military hardware? This comfortable certainty began developing cracks in North Africa when American forces landed in Operation Torch on November 8, 1942. German commanders expected to face inexperienced troops with inferior equipment who could be quickly defeated and pushed back into the sea. What they encountered was something else entirely. Americans were indeed inexperienced. That assessment proved accurate. Early engagements, particularly the Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943, resulted in humiliating American defeats. German forces drove American units back over 50 m, killed over 1,000 American soldiers, captured substantial numbers of prisoners, and seized significant quantities of equipment. German tactical superiority was demonstrated conclusively. But something about the American forces troubled experienced German commanders. The sheer quantity of their equipment was staggering and unprecedented. American units that suffered heavy losses in battle were fully re-equipped within days, sometimes within hours. Vehicles, weapons, ammunition, supplies flowed in seemingly endless streams. Elite German units that won tactical victories found themselves unable to exploit them, because American logistics simply absorbed the losses and continued operations without pause. Captured American supply dumps contained more material than entire German army groups possessed. American artillery fired ammunition at rates German forces could only dream of achieving. American infantry units were motorized to a degree the Wehrmacht had never achieved, even with its elite formations. General Erwin RML, commanding Axis forces in North Africa from February 1941 until his recall to Germany on March 9, 1943, began sending increasingly alarmed reports to Berlin. Each American infantry division, he noted, possessed more trucks than an entire German corps. American logistics units operated vehicle fleets larger than those available to entire German armies. Supply installations captured during German advances contained food, fuel, ammunition, spare parts, medical supplies, and equipment in quantities that seemed wasteful, even obscene by German standards. RML, known for his tactical brilliance, understood that tactics became relevant when facing such massive material superiority. He urged withdrawal from North Africa entirely, arguing that Allied air and naval superiority combined with unlimited logistics made Axis defeat inevitable regardless of battlefield success. These reports were noted, filed, and largely ignored by the High Command in Berlin. RML was known for pessimism, for always requesting more resources, for emphasizing difficulties over opportunities. His complaints were dismissed as the usual general's grumbling, the predictable tendency of field commanders to exaggerate enemy strength and minimize their own capabilities. Hitler personally rejected RML assessments, insisting that willpower and tactical superiority would overcome numerical disadvantages. The Führer's worldview could not accommodate the possibility that industrial production might matter more than ideological commitment or military skill. But the intelligence analysts could not so easily dismiss what they were seeing. Throughout 1943, as the war turned decisively against Germany on multiple fronts, the volume of concerning data increased exponentially. After the surrender of Axis forces in Tunisia on May 13, 1943, German intelligence conducted systematic interrogation of the approximately 125,000 captured German soldiers among the 250,000 to 275,000 total Axis prisoners. The debriefing teams operating from questionnaires developed by the intelligence services sought to understand not just tactical details of the fighting, but broader patterns of Allied, particularly American military capability. The stories these prisoners told were remarkably consistent across rank, unit, and experience level. Every interrogated prisoner described American supply abundance that seemed wasteful by German standards. They spoke of entire meals being thrown away because soldiers did not like the taste. They described American vehicles being abandoned after minor mechanical problems because it was easier to requisition a new one than repair the old. They recounted seeing supply dumps larger than anything in the German army containing food, ammunition, fuel, equipment in quantities that appeared unlimited. Medical supplies were available in abundance, including sulfur drugs that were increasingly scarce in Germany. Captured prisoners received better food as PW than they had eaten as soldiers. Some accounts seemed so extreme that interrogators initially suspected exaggeration or Allied propaganda. But the consistency across hundreds of independent interrogations made dismissal impossible. Officers and enlisted men, paratroopers and infantry, tank crews and artillerymen all told the same stories of overwhelming American material superiority. More significantly, these accounts matched what German forces were experiencing on other fronts. In Sicily, captured in July and August 1943, German forces encountered similar patterns. In Italy, where Allied forces landed in September 1943, the pattern repeated. Everywhere German forces engaged Americans, they found enemies with seemingly unlimited supplies. These prisoner accounts, while concerning, could theoretically be dismissed as subjective impressions exaggerated by defeated soldiers trying to explain their failure. But then the captured documents began arriving in Berlin in greater numbers, and these could not be dismissed. Unlike P accounts, supply documents were clinical, bureaucratic, undeniable. They were not meant to impress or intimidate. They were simply the routine paperwork of American military logistics, the mundane forms that tracked supplies through the military distribution system. And the numbers they contained were apocalyptic for German strategic planning. One particular document proved especially illuminating: a monthly supply report from an American Army Corps operating in Italy during autumn 1943. The report, stamped and signed by multiple logistics officers, listed deliveries and consumption for the month. The Corps consisted of approximately 80,000 men, comparable in size to a German Army Corps. But the comparison ended there. The American Corps had received 3.2